Hello and welcome back to iGCSE Success. Again, apologies about the audio and lack of editing. I promise I am working on it. So in today's video, we will be looking at question 2a and the 4 strands to it. This is part 2, so be sure to check out part 1 if this question is new to you. And we will be using the 2020 specimen paper, which I will be sure to link in the description box below. And I will be reading text C, so feel free to skip this part if you have read the text already. So let's just have a quick look at the question before we read the text. So question 2, identify a word or phrase from the text which suggests the same idea as the words underline. And if you've watched part 1, I've said that this question is particularly tricky. Often Cambridge want you to find quite unusual words or idioms or phrasal verbs. So, that in itself can invariably present some challenges. So, Natalia was expecting the quietness of their walk to be broken suddenly. Number 2 is Natalia slowed herself down and made herself as tall as possible before refusing to go on any further. And the third one reads, her grandfather spoke to her in a low, angry voice. And the last one is, the homeless person was fast asleep. So we are looking for a word or phrase which suggests the same idea as broken suddenly, slowed herself down and made herself as tall as possible, spoke to her in a low, angry voice, and fast asleep. Now let's read the text. Okay, so text C, the gift. This text is taken from a longer narrative. At this point in the story, it is the night of Natalia's 16th birthday. Sorry about that. Her grandfather, a doctor, has arrived back late at night from visiting patients. He has woken Natalia and asked her to follow him quietly through the streets of their city. And then it starts. We were nearing the end of our side street, and I assumed the silence of our walk would be shattered by the bustle along the tramway. But when we got there, nothing, not even a single passing car. Every window was dark. The hazy moon seemed to gather the silence up around it like a net. Not a sound, no sirens, no rats in the bins that lined the street. My grandfather stopped, looked up and down the street, then turned left. It's not far now, he said. I caught up with him long enough to see that he was smiling. Not far to where? I said, out of breath, angry. I drew myself up and stopped. I'm not going any further until you tell me. He turned to look at me, indignant. Lower your voice, you fool, he hissed. Suddenly his arms went over his head in a wide arc. Can't you feel it? No one in the world awake but us, and off he went again. We passed empty windows of shops that had gone out of business, lightless buildings, a beggar sleeping so soundly that I would have thought him dead if I hadn't realized that the moment had closed around us, making everything still. Suddenly grandfather stopped ahead of me and stood, pointing into the distance, his hand shaking with excitement. There, he said, look. I peered out into the street. On the other side there was a street lamp with a dying bulb. I was opening my mouth to say, what? And then I saw it. Half a block from us, an enormous shadow was moving along the street. At first I thought it was a tram, but its shape was too organic, too lumpy, and it was going far too slowly for that, making almost no noise. It was swaying up the street with an even momentum in a rolling motion that was drawing it away from us like a tide. And every time it rocked forward, something about it made a soft dragging sound on the rails. As we watched, the thing sucked in air, and then I let out a deep groan. That's an elephant, I said. My grandfather said nothing. His glasses had fogged up during the walk, but he wasn't taking them off to wipe them. He took my hand. We watched the animal. Its ears were folded back against the domed, balded head with big, lidded eyes. The arched roll on the spine fell away into the hips. Dry folds of skin shook around the shoulders and knees as it shifted its weight. It seemed to take up the whole street. It dragged its curled trunk like a fist along the ground. Several meters in front of it, holding a bag of something that must have been enormously tempting. A short young man was walking slowly backward, drawing it forward with whispers. I saw them at the train station as I was coming home, my grandfather said. The elephant passed, slow, graceful, enchanted by the food in the young man's hand. No one will ever believe this, I said. My grandfather looked at me like he'd never seen me before. You must be joking, he said. Look around. Think for a moment. Do you think anybody would understand? Do you think it will matter to them? Later that year, we would read about how some soldiers had found an elephant near death at the site of an abandoned circus, about how, despite everything, despite closure and bankruptcy, the zoo director had said, "Bring him in, eventually the kids will see him." The newspapers ran a picture of him, standing stark-ribbed in his new pen at the zoo, an advert of better times to come, hope for the future, and the end of the war. Now let's just remind ourselves of the first strand, and that is Natalia was expecting the quietness of their walk to be broken suddenly. So we are looking for a word or phrase which suggests the same idea as something being broken suddenly. And just from reading the text, I'm pretty sure that came quite early on. Again, I'm not going to read it again, but let's just have a quick skim through paragraph 1. Here we go. And I assume the silence of our walk would be shattered by the bustle along the tramway. Now, shattered in this sense, sorry about that. So, shattered in this sense is, of course, a verb. And I guess it's referring to something coming to an abrupt stop. So, shattered very much suggests the idea as something being broken suddenly. So I'm just going to put shattered here. Natalia was expecting the quietness of their walk to be broken suddenly. Now the second one I think is quite difficult, and from what I remember, quite a few of my Year 11s struggled with this one. So let's just read it quickly. Natalia slowed herself down and made herself as tall as possible before refusing to go any further. So we need a word or a phrase which suggests the same as Natalia slowing herself down and making herself as tall as possible. Now, if you have a look at the line beginning with I caught up with him, I caught up with him long enough to see that he was smiling, not far to where, I said, out of breath, angry. I drew myself up and stopped. Now, the reason why I guess some of my Year 11s found this quite difficult, and no doubt other Year 11s around the world, is that it's asking you, or it requires you to understand the phrasal verb to draw up. Okay, if you draw yourself up, okay, you are standing as tall and as straight as possible. So of course, if you've never heard of that phrasal verb, that may well be quite tricky. So I'm just going to put drew myself up. So we've got shattered for the first one and drew myself up, a phrasal verb. Now, strand 3 is her grandfather spoke to her in a low, angry voice. So we are looking for a word or phrase which suggest the same idea as her grandfather speaking in a low and angry voice. I don't think this one is too difficult, and from what I remember, it comes quite soon after this phrasal verb. Yes, so it's line 9, guys. Lower your voice, you fool. He hissed. He hissed. Now, of course, the verb to hiss is often used to show anger or some sort of disapproval. So I'm just going to type here, he hissed. Now the last strand reads, the homeless person was fast asleep. So again, we are looking for a word or phrase which suggests the same idea as being fast asleep. Hopefully this one shouldn't cause too many problems. So I'm pretty sure the answer to this one is line 12 or 13. Let's just have a little read. We passed empty windows of shops that had gone out of business, lightless buildings, a beggar sleeping so soundly. Sleeping so soundly. And of course, this is another idiom, I guess. Sleeping so soundly, you are in a deep sleep, and I'm very much referring to, I guess, that deep and peaceful sleep that we all very much enjoy. So I'm just going to quickly put here, sleeping so soundly. So just to conclude, guys, if we look at the answers that we've managed to get, the first one is shattered, quite an unusual verb. Drew myself up. Okay, we've got a phrasal verb there. That verb hissed, and that idiom sleeping so soundly. And if you did watch part 1, I did go over this idea that Cambridge seems to be inclined to asking students to pick out quite unfamiliar words, idioms, phrasal verbs and whatnot. So it's really, really important that you have a good understanding of any kind of idiomatic expressions. And that's all for today, guys. Again, I hope this video has been useful. I will try and get my editing software fixed as soon as possible, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks.